I think we're ready for our next book, Homecoming by Kate Morton. Melanie, you read this.
I did.
What is the story?
Oh my goodness. So it starts off on a Christmas Eve and there's a really awful discovery. It's set in Australia, part of the book set in Australia. And so you're back in time. There's this awful discovery of a family who are dead and it essentially looks like they are just sleeping. And I was expecting the book then to be like this historical fiction read. And I was really nervous because I don't read historical fiction. I was like, how am I going to get through 600 pages where, this big murder mystery type thing? But you jump forward then in time and Jess is a journalist, so she's around 40 and she's struggling to make ends meet. She is kind of looking for a story, she's a real journalist. Like she wants to like get into the meat of something. And she discovers that her grandmother, who as good as brought her up, she was like her mother, she's had a fall back in Australia. So she kind of grew up in Australia, now she's in London. She goes back to visit her grandmother and she's described as one of those old ladies who's just real, she's full of beans, like she's looks after herself, she's grand, even though she's quite old. But she's really shocked to discover that her grandmother's very confused, she's very frail in the hospital bed. And she comes upon a book that her grandmother's been reading about this murder that happened at the start when you were introduced to the book. And it's this scene of this delivery man finding this dead family. So she's reading a true crime novel about those events. And it basically through the book then you're discovering that Jess, the journalist, her life is very much tied to what happened in this murder. So because she's a journalist and because she loves storytelling, writing, all that kind of stuff, she gets very sucked into this book and trying to piece together like how it relates to her grandmother and why her grandmother had this fall. So she fell going up to the attic, which is the one place that Jess was never allowed to play as a child. So she's like, what was she looking for? What prompted her to go up there? And it was just such a classic mystery story. And when I was a kid, like my nana was always a big fan of, Agatha Christie, that kind of thing. So I grew up loving that kind of stuff. And I feel like anyone my age who did grow up on the whole Harry Potters and all that loves a good mystery. But it really, it jumps back and forward in time. So it is a dual timeline, but it's done so well because a lot of it is told through these passages of a novel. And it's not heavy, and it is quite, I thought it was going to be really slow paced and basically like an Everest book for me. And, obviously, I was
an
reading
Everest
it for this.
book? Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I was like, but it really wasn't. I was in the shower and I was like, what is going to happen with your man? And I was thinking about it when I wasn't reading. And that for me is such a good sign.
That's the sign of a good book.
It's a great story. And it felt very much like a love letter to literature itself because of the exploration through the novel in the book. So you're reading a novel about a novel, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's a lot about motherhood and how complex relationships can be. And, I myself have had a complex relationship with my mom, and it was very, very realistic, the way she explores intergenerational relationships and just how you can be quite estranged from someone and there's still so much love there. And it's just really, her character exploration is stunning. But the main thing that I'm like a Kate Morton fangirl now. I went and ordered 2 more of her books.
Yeah, she's fabulous already.
I literally, some of the passages I had to read multiple times because they were just so gorgeous. And you could smell Australia. I've never been there, but I felt like I was there and that these
That's
were people
my favourite
I knew.
description though of a book is when you can smell it.
Yeah, you can just, it's just
You
like
can
all the
taste it,
senses. Yeah, she's just a beautiful writer. And I was Googling her and I realised she's all these other books. How have I not heard of this woman? Maybe it's just because it's a genre I wouldn't usually gravitate toward. And that's why I was really thankful that I was given this book on this show, because I don't think I would have picked it up.
Yeah.
I think because my impression would have been that it was, a long story set in the past and stuff, but it's quite it's contemporary, but it has all of the amazing things about, a big old house and secrets and lies and why we tell lies, and Oh, it was just stunning. And it was a very satisfying ending. I guessed one thing early on, but it was almost more of because I'd guessed it, and I think I guessed like a more horrific version. But when that like kind of was, coming to, I was like, oh, I was right. It was really, really, I was like, yes, go me, like patting myself on the back for figuring out the clues. But then the actual like kind of twist and like what happened, I never ever would have expected. And that is just the feeling you get when you're like, no. Like if anyone walked in, you're in the same room as someone, but you're in a totally different place with all these
You're
people.
observing again, because you said there's 2 layers, but just, is it a spoiler to ask, like, whether it's quite an interesting thing that you're reading? There's a book that somebody is reading in the book.
In the book,
and it's through the book that they're reading that this stuff is unfolding.
Yes. A lot of it
but is there a connection to you said she's reading it, her mum is reading it.
So her grandmother who had the fall, she had been reading it, and that's why it kind of like piques her interest, if you get me.
Right.
So,
yes.
So then she's like, why has she been reading this? But it's very evident quite quickly that it links to her own past,
life.
Her own life.
Yeah.
And and it does like with your book, and it's there's 3 stories within it. It's quite like the same with this, even though it's mostly told through Jess, the journalist, and then in the past you're seeing like events from the book first of all, but then also passages of like what happened. But there's her mother, her mother, and her grandmother are basically, it's about these 3 women and what ties them, and what came between them, and the revelations in it are really, really shocking. I will say as well, because like I'm very heavily pregnant reading this book. There's a lot. There's a lot about there's like a missing baby, and I was like, I need to know what happens to these children. What happened to the baby? Where's the baby? So it's very even if you're not a mother, you have a mother, it's something that I feel like so many people will relate and see themselves and see the relationships reflected in it. It's stunning.